My name is Sally Tinker. I am a science teacher at Berthoud High School in Colorado. This year I teach AP Environmental Science, Honors Biology, and I had a genetics section this past fall. For my project with CHP, I chose to run this with my AP Environmental students. I had 51 students, and that was arranged from 10th to 12th grade here at Berthoud High. And the goal of this project, I had the students investigate pyrrhic herbivory and multi-grazing species through collaboration. Within each group, they took on expert roles, and the final product was an integrated pest management plan to remove the invasive eastern red cedar trees from rangeland ecosystems. Um, a little bit of background going into this. I do a project-based learning style with the AP environmental groups. So they were on their second project of community ecology. The topics addressed before coming into this, we had previously covered population ecology, survivorship curves, and basic things of endangered and invasive species. So I kind of wanted to tie in and segue um, this project into the invasive species component. Um, Before we began the project, I created a CurryPod activity. The students really love this activity because it's interactive. They get to sit at their desks behind the comfort of their cell phones, or they can do this on a computer. Um, so with the CurryPod, there's multiple different types of question settings that you can develop. This is the one that I used with my students, but we started off with some easy questions like, what is a word that describes what a native species is? Characteristics of invasive species, kind of a review from the previous lessons. Um, and moving into invasive species that students know of. How do they get introduced into new areas? How do we manage them? And eventually tying it into our main goal of combating the invasive red cedar. So at this point, they have no knowledge of what pyrrhic herbivory is or what multi-grazing species can do to get rid of a problematic species like the red cedar. And this is a super fun way to get the kids engaged and kind of hooked into the lesson. They actually, once they do their, um, put in their questions or responses, it's an anonymous peer voting at the end. So they get to see each other's drawings and responses and vote on what they think the best ones are. So it's a kind of a neat way to get the kids engaged in the lesson. So that was day one. Took about 30 minutes to do the CurryPod. I started off with the survey from CHP, so that took a bit of time. On the next day, um, I introduced the main slideshow to them. So I used the slideshow here linked. Go ahead and pull that up. So this is the main activity for the bulk of the learning segment. I hooked the students in with a picture that I took from our trip to Nebraska, and asking them what did they think happened on each side of the road to lead to the different conditions. And some students chimed in with one side gets watered more than the other, or there's less nutrients available. So kind of leading into the main purpose of the lesson. Um, We started off, I gave each group a paper article about the basics of rangelands to read through and take some notes in their notebooks about them, just to kind of give them a little bit of background knowledge before we start. So they had to write down interesting facts they learned about what rangelands are, the pressures that rangelands are facing, how are they being negatively impacted, and what kind of ecosystem services that rangelands provide. The article, the questions kind of go page by page, so it makes it a little bit easier for the students to access. But a lot of students were surprised at how much of the planet is covered in rangeland biomes. So This was a short blurb of an article that I pulled from the CHP resource bank. But we started off with students reading the article, getting some background knowledge, and then having a discussion about the importance of protecting them, how small things like an invasive species can have on a rangeland systems, and what are the different services that can be impacted from that. So the main learning objectives for this lesson, students would explore the role that prescribed fires and multi-grazing species play in the management of invasive species, and we were specifically targeting the eastern red cedar that's encroaching towards the west part of North America. And by the end of this, they developed an integrated management plan to help combat the woody encroachment. So I gave them They had to work in groups of 3 if we had a weird number in class. Some groups had a 4th. They were kind of like the manager of the group, being a mini expert on all 3 realms and kind of helping tie in all of the pieces together to make a cohesive plan. So these links are part of the slideshow to give each student their criteria that they needed to research and meet. And then I have a rubric for the project linked in here as well if you'd like to take a look at that. But for the prescribed fire expert, they were looking up what it takes to run a prescribed burn, procedures for how to conduct one safely, conditions that need to be met for safely managed burns, how many volunteers are typically used, the equipment that's needed, and then consequences that can come from a burn, money-wise, environmentally, socially, and why this would be a good strategy to combat a woody encroachment issue. The next expert targeted the multi-grazing species component, so learning about the different types of grazers and the vegetation that they prefer, what kind of terrain that they like to or are able to migrate to, time frames and seasons that these grazers consume vegetation, pros and cons of using these on properties or farms, and then why this would be a good strategy for helping combat the woody encroachment of the red cedar. And then finally, we had an ecology expert. So they were an expert about the red cedar tree, how quickly that this tree can reproduce and spread, where it came from, how it's getting introduced into these new areas, what problems that it's having on biodiversity levels of plant and animal life, and then potential solutions that we could install to help reduce the ever-growing populations. So the 4th expert here, we've got our group liaison. If we needed one, their job would be to help the group come together and connect all of these findings into a nice cohesive argument, making sure that everyone's collaborating and meeting the conclusion guidelines. So by the end of this project, students had a choice on how they wanted to present this, but they needed to develop a comprehensive explanation of why it's more effective to integrate the use of prescribed fires with the grazing species simultaneously, how those combinations can positively impact biodiversity levels and recreational opportunities. So I gave the groups kind of freedom in how they wanted to do this. They could choose from the list that I gave them or choose their own method, which I've got some unique deliverables I can show you here in a second. But gives them a little bit of universal design of learning and freedom of choice, and it makes it more fun for the students if they can complete an activity in an area that they feel confident in. So we've got art projects. A few students made videos or podcasts. But I'll show you those examples here in a second. And then the last slide, we've got some given resources for each expert to access to help kind of streamline the research process. I also gave them websites in their Google Classroom to so they can find their own videos or credible sources for research. But I will show you some of the, oops, let me go to deliverables that I got from this group. They're pretty awesome. In my drive, I've got sample projects from the students. We've got resources that can be handed out to the students as they do this project. And then the slideshow I just showed you is in here, as well as the PowerPoint that we're going through right now. So some of the deliverables that the students handed in, one group created a board game. So you kind of roll the dice, and then whatever color you land on, there's facts about each color represents either ecology. We've got the grazers and the fire. So a little bit of a Candyland style. We got some infographics on the Red Cedar. Students have access to a Canva account, which they like. And then we've got Minecraft. We had one group, they like to play Minecraft, so they made a Minecraft world and went through each of the three components. So they really took this and ran with it. Yeah, all of that is in here if you'd like to check that out. We had some make dioramas. We got podcasts, and then another Canva here. Those are the sample projects. So for student resources, I posted these in their Google Classrooms to kind of help them gather some information and evidence. This would be for our grazers. We're not there yet. And then here's the article for the students to utilize as they're trying to get some background on what rangelands are if they have no idea. And then teacher resources here, we've got the PowerPoint that the students would have to give them instructions and criteria for how to meet expectations of the project. This is the reflection that I made, and then got a project outline. It's kind of more consolidated. But we've got the lesson focus. The standards we use here are NGSS, and the two that align pretty well with this project are 2.6 and 2.7. So making claim evidence and reasonings of complex interactions in ecosystems and how changing conditions could result in new ecosystems, how the rangelands are being encroached by those red cedar trees and conditions are changing, species are not as prevalent as they should be. So here's a 5-step process that you can choose from if you want to consolidate some of these options, or if you'd like to go through the whole thing. It takes about a week to get done. I give the students a lot of work time in class, and it turned out, some of their projects turned out really, really awesome. So we started off defining and brainstorming. I just put all that into a CurryPod activity, so that's linked here for you if you'd like to make a copy of that. It is a free website, and you can play around with it and tweak some of the questions if you want. 3, introduce them to the project. So this is the link to the student's slideshow I just showed you. I had my first class run presentations, and it gets pretty redundant. They talk about the same things over and over. So I put in a note here. You could have the students present to maybe teachers that have an off period or other staff members in the building about their projects. I do this with our first PBL. The students actually explain what they did to a staff member, and they really enjoy sharing their work with someone else. So that's an option if you don't want to do formal class presentations. Our 4th task with the AP Environmental, I gave them a little bit of an extension. I pulled this from Brian Yocker's drive, some FRQs made by the Prairie Project, but this one is about the impacts of fire on bird diversity and grazing. So I gave students a printout of this FRQ, and I gave them about 20 minutes to complete it. but this is a good extension if you're trying to work on FRQ or AP exam test taking strategies, and it ties really well in with this project. So gives a little bit of a different perspective on how fires can impact bird diversity levels, species richness. And then I didn't do this with my group, but I created an exit ticket after I presented to my cohort. But this is a good way to kind of summarize the entire lesson and get some data on student growth throughout the process. It's a simple 3-2-1 exit ticket, but you can do this as a digital document or you can print them out and have students fill them out before they leave the last class. But 3 things that they learned from the project, write down 2 things that they thought were interesting that they found in their research, or 1 thing they still have questions about that they would like to do more research in, just to get an idea of what kind of stuck out to the students and see all of the different meaningful pieces of the project. So if I could go back and do this again, I would have the students do this exit ticket. It shouldn't take more than about 5 minutes before they leave for the day. But I gave them some topics that we covered in class to use or consider, or they can, whatever experiences they had with the lesson, they can fill it out. But I think that would be a good way to conclude this project and get some data to assess how much the students actually learned from start to the end. So no tests or formal assessments. It's more experiencing the process and project based. But I think the kids really had a fun time with this lesson and they came up with some awesome deliverables by the end of it. I think one thing I forgot to mention while the students were doing research on as individual experts, I did have them do sort of a jigsaw activity. So all of the students in the groups who were fire experts sat together, multi-grazing species experts sat together, and ecologies. So they completed the research as experts and then took, when they went back to their groups, they took all that information back and kind of acted as the expert of that in their groups. So that was one thing that I forgot previously, but yeah, there's not many materials needed for this. It depends on what kind of project that the students want to do. I do have a lot of cardboard and construction paper laying around for the dioramas. So if they want to build 3D models, maybe just have some random items on hand, or you can have the students bring in their own stuff from home. But that is pretty much the bulk of the lesson. Let's see. Yep. So to kind of close this, these are pros and cons that I reflected on. The pros for this learning segment, it was highly collaborative. The students were working as a group. They all had different roles, so everybody had their own job and contributions to the project. They had freedom and choice and creativity. One student actually made a connection to this project with her family. They actually do burns on their farms, and she shared that with the class. And then working as groups and having smaller chunks to take care of the tasks kind of reduced and modified the workloads. If they had smaller groups, you can pick and choose which criteria for each expert you want to prioritize. They don't have to do all of it. Some cons or modifications that I would make: if you have a time constraint and you can't commit to 3 out of the 5 days, if you do that, you could take out the Curie Pod review, or you don't have to do the FRQ if needed. I just use that with my AP class to get some FRQ test taking strategies intertwined. A lot of students come to class with dead Chromebooks, so I had a lot of printouts available with the directions. if the students are absent and coming into the class in the middle of the project, maybe have a plan for that. And then with the expert jigsaw, it takes them a while to get going, and a lot of them just wanted to be silent and do research on their own. So it's kind of got to encourage them to talk to one another a little bit. It just depends on the type of kids that you have and the personalities in the room. But um, like I said, everything is here in my drive. If you'd like to review some of the sample products, um, it really opens up another realm of creativity, and it gets a lot of buy-in from the students when they can do their own, put their own spin on things. And I think they learned a lot throughout the process. But feel free to pick and choose the activities that you want to do. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to help. But thank you.